And we are back with part 5 of this week's reading of Exodus chapters 5 through 15 of the Messianic Jewish Family Bible Tree of Life version, TLV. We just learned what Passover was all about, the very first Passover that happened. Um, and chapter 13 begins redemption of the firstborn. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Consecrate to me all the firstborn from every womb of Benaiah Israel, both men and animals. This is mine." Moses said to the people, "Remember this day on which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. By a strong hand Adonai brought you out from this place. No hametz, no leavened bread, no yeast may be eaten. This day in the month of Aviv, you are going out. When Adonai brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you are to observe this service during this month. For 7 days you are to eat matzah, and the seventh day is to be a feast to Adonai. Matzah is to be eaten throughout the 7 days, and no hametz is to be seen among you, nor within any of your borders. So there can be no leaven, no yeast, in other words. You are to tell your son on that day, saying, "It is because of what Adonai did for me when I came out of Egypt, so it will be like a sign on your hand and a reminder between your eyes, so that the Torah of Adonai may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand Adonai has brought you out of Egypt. You are to keep this ordinance as a mood from year to year. Now when Adonai brings you into the land of the Canaanite, as he swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, you are to set apart Adonai every firstborn from the womb, and every firstborn male animal you have will be Adonai's. Every firstborn donkey you are to redeem with a lamb, and if you do not redeem it, then you are to break its neck. But you are to redeem every firstborn male among your sons. So when your son asks you in times to come, 'What is this?' say to him, 'By a strong hand Adonai brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage. And when Pharaoh refused to let us go, Adonai slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both men and animals. So I sacrifice all firstborn males, but I redeem the firstborn of my sons.' So it will be like a sign on your hand and like frontlets between your eyes. For by a strong hand Adonai brought us out of Egypt." Parashat Beshalach. And we're going to begin this, but we won't be actually finishing this one. This is the Torah teaching that's going to go into next week. After Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them along the road to the land of the Philistines, although that was nearby. For God said, "The people might change their minds if they see war and return to Egypt." So God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Sea of Reeds. And Benaiah Israel went up out of the land of Egypt armed. Moses also took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had made Benaiah Israel swear an oath, saying, "God will surely remember you, and then you are to carry my bones away with you." This was something that was promised to Joseph before he passed away. So they journeyed from Succoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. Adonai went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, so they could travel both day and night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night never departed from the people. Now imagine that, how God was leading them. Um, they were never lost. God was actually, leading them by day and by night, always by their side. Now, I just want to mention Passover Eve. Now, this year, it is actually the month in the calendar, in the civil calendar, is actually called Nisan 14. And that, and actually, as I mentioned in previous videos, it's the evening before that it is begun, like at sundown. So it would actually be on Nisan 13 that it begins into Nisan 14. The official Passover, which is called Pesach, Peseach. So Pesach is Passover. And this year, the eve of Passover is on April 7th, and official Passover is April 8th. And then we go into the feast. The day one of Feast of Unleavened Bread is actually the 9th of April, would begin on the eve of. Again, there's two feasts that are really close together. Well, actually a third, because we have the Feast of First Fruits that will occur also. Um, so they're all very close together, and we'll talk a little bit more about them as well. But the ones that were just mentioned in this reading were the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They called it the Feast of Matzah. And also Passover. And these are eternal feasts. So I just wanted to touch on that just a little bit. There is a passage also in John 19, verse 33. And if you remember what instructions that they were given about the unblemished lamb, John 19, verse 33 says, "Now when they came to Yeshua and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs." So he had no unbroken bone. So that was also prophesied, that none of his bones shall be broken. And in verse 36, it says that very same thing. These things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not a bone of his shall be broken. And that's in John 19, verse 36. Chapter 14, the Sea of Reeds Showdown, the Red Sea, also known as the Red Sea. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Benaiah Israel, so that they turn back and encamp before the Pi Hahareth," and I'm going to spell that Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. You are to camp by the sea opposite Baal Zephon. Pharaoh will say concerning Bnei Israel, "They are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. I will harden Pharaoh's heart, so he will follow after them. Then I will be glorified over Pharaoh along with all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am Adonai." So they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants, they had a change of heart towards the people, and they said, "What is this we have done, that we let Israel go from serving us?" So he prepared his chariots and took his people with him. He took 600 of the finest chariots, along with all other chariots of Egypt, and captains over them. Adonai hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so he pursued Benaiah Israel, for Benaiah Israel went out with a high hand. But the Egyptians pursued them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, as well as his charioteers and his army, and overtook them as they were encamped by the sea beside Pi Hahiroth, opposite Baal Zephon. And when Pharaoh drew near, Benaiah Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. So they were terrified. And Benaiah Israel cried out to Adonai. They said to Moses, "Have you taken us away to die in the wilderness because there were no graves in Egypt? Why have you dealt this way with us to bring us out of Egypt? Did we not say to you in Egypt, 'Let us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians'? It was better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of Adonai, which he will perform for you today. You have seen the Egyptians today, but today you will never see them again. Adonai will fight for you while you hold your peace." Then Adonai said to Moses, "Why are you crying to me? Tell Benaiah Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it. Then Benaiah Israel will go into the midst of the sea on dry ground. Then behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will go in after them, so that I will be glorified over Pharaoh and all of his army, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am Adonai when I have been glorified over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God who went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them. Also the pillar of cloud moved from in front and stood behind them, and so came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. There was the cloud and the darkness over here. Yet it gave light by night over there. Neither one came near the other all night long. So God actually had a darkness darkening Egypt, but kept Israel in light. But Egypt could not get near them. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. Adonai drove the sea back with a strong east wind throughout the night and turned the sea into dry land. So the waters turned the I'm sorry. So the waters were divided. Then Benaiah Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, while the waters were like walls to them on their right and on their left. So imagine this, the Egyptians are coming after them. They can't get to them because there's such a darkness over them, separating them from the children of Israel. And now the sea is being parted. This mighty sea is being parted to the left and to the right, and the Benaiah Israel can walk on dry ground. But the Egyptians pursued and they went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's forces, his chariots, and his horsemen. Now it came about during the morning watch that Adonai looked at the army of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud and caused the army of the Egyptians to panic. He took off their chariot wheels and caused them to drive heavily, so that the Egyptians said, "Get away from the presence of Israel, for Adonai fights for them against the Egyptians." Then Adonai said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters come back upon the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched his hand out over the waters, and the sea returned to its strength at the break of dawn. The Egyptians were fleeing from it, but Adonai overthrew them in the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots, the horsemen, and the entire army of Pharaoh that had gone in after them into the sea. Not one of them remained, but Benaiah Israel had walked on dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were like walls to them on their right hand and on their left. So Adonai saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great work that Adonai did over the Egyptians, the people feared Adonai, and they believed in Adonai and his servant Moses. He actually delivered them again from the hand of the Egyptians that were coming after them. And there was some over the past few years, recent archaeological dig that actually found some of the parts of chariots in this sea. And they're actually thinking that these were the chariots of the Egyptians that were chasing the children of Israel during this time frame. They were ancient and they were found actually. So I thought that was very interesting. First Corinthians chapter 10, 1 to 2 says, "For I do not want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. They were all immersed into Moses in the cloud and in the sea." And now we move on to chapter 15. Chapter 15 is the Song of Moses and Miriam. Then Moses and Benaiah Israel sang this song to Adonai. "I will sing to Adonai, for he is highly exalted, the horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea. Adonai is my strength and song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will glorify him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. Adonai is a warrior, Adonai is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has hurled into the sea, and his chosen captains have sunk into the sea of reeds. The deeps cover them. They sank to the depths like a stone. Your right hand, Adonai, is glorious in power. Your right hand, Adonai, dashes the enemy to pieces. In the greatness of your excellency, you overthrow those who resist you. You send forth your wrath. It consumes them as stubble. With the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood upright as a heap. The deeps became firm ground in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I will pursue. I will overtake. I will divide the spoil, my lust shall gorge on them. I will draw my sword, my hand will destroy them. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you, Adonai? Among the gods, who is like you? Glorious in holiness, awesome in praises, doing wonders. You stretched out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. You in your loving kindness led the people you have redeemed. You guided them in your strength to your holy habitation. When the peoples hear, they will tremble. Anguish will seize the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom are terrified. Trembling grips Moab's mighty men. All of Canaan's inhabitants will melt away. Terror and dread will fall on them. By the greatness of your arm, they become still as stone. Till your people cross over, Adonai, till the people whom you purchase cross over. You bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, the place, Adonai, that you have made for yourself to dwell in, the sanctuary, Adonai, which your hands have prepared. Adonai will reign forever and ever. For Pharaoh's horses with his chariots and his horsemen went into the sea, but Adonai brought the waters of the sea back over them. Yet Bnei Israel walked in the midst of the sea on dry ground. Then Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing, as Miriam sang to them, Sing to Adonai, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he is thrown into the sea. And I'm going to come back with the end of this chapter because I'm already at 17 minutes. And I'm going to pause this and come back.